start, I would like to remind you all that we are going to make a book again this year. So everybody, please send the photo you want in the book to me. The email address was on Facebook. I'm going to put it on the website, and maybe Emilio can also send you an email to the people. And in the book, we are also going to use the photos that have won a prize in the last 2 years. That much for the book. I think I will start now with the challenge. As usual, you know, I am only giving my personal view, so please don't take any offense in the things I say. I didn't have much time to prepare everything because I've only had yesterday. I received the majority of the photos earlier, but I've been away for 3 days. So, what else do I have to say? Yes, I did change the order around a little bit, so you can guess whose photo it is, which is always fun for people, I think. So before we begin, there's one thing I would like to say. Still life is not just a challenge, it's actually a genre. So the possibilities were pretty much endless. You could do anything really. And so I hope that you can see there's quite a variety of photos. There's quite a few people who have participated. So I think it's a good thing. I will try to comment on the way I remember the photo from seeing them on my screen, because I know that here on the projection and on the screen, they're slightly different in color and contrast. Okay, so I think this is yes. I'm starting with, wait, I'm gonna try, if you click there. My own photos, just to get them over with and to give some basic ideas as an introduction. My idea was that a still life challenge is quite simple. The definition of still life is a composition of inanimate objects, and you make a photo or a painting of that. So I thought most people would just go and choose an object, put it on the coffee table, hang a bedsheet behind it, and look what you can do, because it's an ideal challenge to experiment with your camera settings, with natural light, artificial light, anything. So to experiment with it, I thought if you just take one object and see what you can do with that, that's already a very interesting start. So I used a simple glass jar on a very reflective surface, and see how you can make a composition with that. So I chose a horizontal composition with a lot of reflection and a perfect mirrored reflection almost of the object itself. So it's mainly just a study in black and white, but using a color photograph. So you get tones of blue and gray and everything in it, and the imperfections of the surface to see if that helps with the composition. So you got a lot of vertical lines, you got the curved lines of the object, and that's just like a study. Nothing more, nothing less. No. Okay. We are trying a couple of things here with the settings. So. Okay. Yeah, the borders. Yeah, but okay. So the next image I made is actually an older one, because we were going to have a still life challenge about a year or 3 ago, but then it got skipped because it was too close to the food challenge. And with this photograph, I try to do what we see a lot these days, which is making a reference to the Golden Age paintings and the clair obscur type of paintings that were made. And I think the interesting thing about this type of image is that you try to bring out the different textures of the different materials in a painting, or in this case in a photo. And it's a very good way to see how you can improve your technical photography by getting the light exactly as you want it. Of course, in these type of images, you usually have a whole lot of symbolism going on, and this is just a technical test, so I didn't put a lot of symbolism in there. But I think it's an interesting image in itself. It's also a possibility to try to do some more funnier things, and in this one you can see if there's a story, if it's a penguin that's trying to learn a human how to swim or whatever. I think as an image and a composition, for me it works. And once again, I try to look for a color image that's very close to black and white, which I think is an interesting circuit to investigate. And then there's the last option I think that you can do is actually go out and look for a composition of inanimate objects somewhere that somebody else made in an interesting light and take a photo of that. Personally, I think it's much more easy to just put something on your coffee table and make a photo of that. But apparently most people have done the opposite and went out to look for things that might qualify as a still life. So this is actually a shop window with a lot of objects. Now, the problem with these type of compositions that you find is that the edges are never clear, because it's in a shop window, you have the window, but if you take the entire window, you don't have an interesting composition. So you have to do something around the image, around the center of your image, to make it more of composition of the focus. And so I chose to put it in monochrome and blur the edges.
You want to do what?
Yes. Yes, there's. Yeah. Could everybody please mute their microphones, because we have a lot of background noise here.
Frank, I think the problem, looking at which image gets highlighted, is the microphone on Rod Westwood's laptop is on. And if Rod could mute his microphone, it would probably kill the feed.
Okay, we'll try that.
I think I muted it.
There's a yellow box often comes up around your laptop, Rod. So I'm thinking the microphone.
Okay, I think Rod has done that now, so hopefully that should be solved now. So as normally we don't say a lot about the title image, but I'm going to use my own to say a few things. I think that one of the interesting things about still life is that with a very simple composition, you can actually examine whether you want your background in or out, you put your camera on a tripod ideally, and you try different settings to see how you can keep the detail in the flowers, in the vase, and still have a part of the background in or not, just as you wish it. So I think that was the main idea of this challenge, to see how you can express your personality in the object you choose. Okay, so here we have a garden wall ornamentation of a gecko, where you can find it on the wall. Now, when you just take one object and make a photo of that, in this challenge particularly, you have to really consider your composition and how the background works with the foreground, the object, which is just one simple, interesting object here. And to my personal taste, I think that the gradient in the background with the texture on the wall and the gradient from the very bright yellow to the overexposed white in the right bottom corner distracts me a little bit. And also, I think with this particular subject, you could have, I'm sorry to say, but cropped tighter. But I think because we are going to have a series here of similar subjects, and you can see that with this one, the composition is so much richer because there's a lot of things going on here that make it interesting. First of all, the actual subject is the gecko, which is the same color as the background, but because it is captured in this trapezium-shaped terracotta frame, there's a lot going on, and it's also below the bottom of the entire composition, and on the top you have the shadow, the shades of a roof blocking the photo up on the top, and you also have the shadow on the right-hand side of the actual subject. So there's a very interesting ratio between the background and the actual subject, and the light is captured very well because you see all the detail in the skin of the gecko, the lizard. You have the texture in the background, which is quite present, but it doesn't disturb me as much as it did in the photo before that. And now here we have the same subject, but this time there's two geckos, and they're actually part of the wall or the floor, I don't know. Now for me here, the color of the actual bricks around it, the stones, is much more present than the patina in the two geckos. Plus, I don't know if I can use the arrow. The right-hand side of the photo isn't razor sharp, so that's a bit of a problem to get the idea. I do like the idea that you tried an almost symmetrical composition. And because I've only had yesterday, I've tried to do a change of the image, but still I think here the stones are too present to guide your eyes straight to the two geckos. And now here, once again, the composition is a lot more easy on the eye. It's soft. You have the texture on the wall. It does guide your eye, but there's enough detail, especially if you look at it at home on a large screen. You can see all the beautiful colors in the metal little gecko. And it's sharp enough, and you have the shadow as an extra element here. So, and that was Harry. And I'm very happy that we have photos of Harry again. So thank you. Now, as I said, the definition is a composition of inanimate objects. So strictly speaking, for me, I wouldn't see this photo as a still life. It's actually a nature photo. I think it's a very good idea to have a challenge around that, somewhere between landscape and detail, trying to bring out the beauty of nature, because I think it's a lovely, lovely photo with a lot going on, interesting composition. The light falls beautifully in the webs and the plants, but for me, it's actually not a still life. Nice colors, good contrast, everything you want, but for me, it's not a still life. The same here. lovely light, beautiful, warm light on the bark of the tree, the climbing ivy. Very interesting that you have the cold light in the background and the warm light on the tree. I think as a photo, really good, really interesting. But again, to me, if I see this photo, I don't think still life, but great, interesting, lovely photo. Now here we have a still life, and I think this is really great because it reminds me of something that Gypsy once said: try to make a very striking photo of a very mundane subject. And this type of chairs is actually known as where the idea of industrial design can go completely wrong, because we all know these chairs. We see them everywhere. They're ugly. We all find them ugly. But here, they become interesting because there's the moss growing over it. There's a warm light on the bottom of it. It's at a very unusual angle. Well, you can see them around, leaning against the table, but it's a very interesting composition. Your eyes are guided in the right direction. You got a very interesting, how do you say that? The background and the foreground complement each other. So I think as a photo, this really, really works. It's very, very interesting. And it's, yeah, it's a good photo because of the choice of a shallow depth of field. However, the chair isn't sharp everywhere. But for me, that's not a real problem. I think as a whole, the photo really, really works. Here we have an art object. So that's clearly a still life with just one object, very tightly cropped. It's a good photo, I think. But I also think that in this photo, your thoughts go to what the artwork actually means, where it takes your mind. Is it about split personality? You can appreciate the texture of and the material in which it made, but it doesn't really move me. I think the artwork itself would move me more than the photo of the actual work. And those were Marlene's photos. Thank you, Marlene. Here we see a wall with a graffiti. So technically speaking, yes, that is an animate object. But if you would ask anyone, what is the challenge for this photo, you would probably say graffiti and not still life. But still, I think it's a very interesting photo because you have parts of the wall, you have the graffiti that's fading away, that's breaking down. You got nature taking over. So there's a lot going on in this photo. Gray tones, the red tones of the brick, the green of the ivy. Good composition, interesting photo. It does surpass just the capturing of the graffiti. Okay, so here we have again a graffiti, but now there's a motorcycle in front of it, interacting with the graffiti, just as if there's somebody sitting on it, on the motorbike. So that's interesting, that's fun. The color scheme, just as in the photo before that, is very soft, very muted, interesting. Now here, I think that some purists would say, why don't you straighten the vertical lines here? There's somebody giving a lot of noise. Somebody
It's Richard hasn't muted his mic.
Okay, Richard, could you please mute your microphone? Okay, but for me, I think because it's a graffiti on a door that's already had its time, I think that the fact that you didn't straighten it gives it a little bit more life. You could actually even have gone more to the left or the right to use the perspective in the wall and the door more to emphasized the fact that the motorcycle is actually three-dimensional and the rest is two-dimensional. And here we got similar idea with a bicycle this time. I think it's very well spotted. It's very nice. You got the wonderful texture in the wall, a really great graffiti, and with the bicycle, it just takes it a step further. So interesting photo. Once again, when I think of still life, I don't really think of this, but it's a very interesting and a nice photo. And the light is, well, very good in this case. And those were Dave Roundtree's photos. Thank you, Dave. Very interesting, very personal take on the subject. Now here we have a very sweet, nice photo of a hammock, a sun hat. It's almost like a photo you would expect in a holiday brochure or a ladies' magazine for leisure. But I've noticed at home that there's quite a graininess on it. And actually you would expect it to be razor sharp in some points, because there's quite a difference between the texture of the fabric used for the hammock, the fabric of the hat, the cushions. And on my screen, that the blurriness, the graininess was a bit distracting for me. So I thought, if that's the problem in your photo, you can actually go the other way and try to over accentuate the grain. And I think it's, I can't remember the name of the filter, where you actually exaggerate the white to make it more atmospheric, or you make it really sharp.
Now, in the Orton effect, Frank?
Yes?
Orton effect.
Oh, I'm trying to think of what's it's in Photoshop. It's under the filter gallery. It's one of the very old filters where you can use your foreground color to come out to where there is more light in your photo. So you can really have interesting effects with that. If you want to make something softer, it's a softening effect. But I can't think of the name right now. I'm really sorry. I'll look it up and put it, when it comes on Facebook, I'll put it up there. Now here we have a similar idea, just a simple composition, a chair, a little table made out of a sewing machine, legs, and the bamboo in the background. And here it really works. It's interesting. Once again, you can straight away use this photo in a magazine or anything. It does give a lot of mood. It makes your mind wander. It's a very nice, simple photo, good choice for black and white. And enough detail in the dark areas, but still a very good contrast, I think. And those were Rachel's photos. So thank you, Rachel, because we can really see your personality in your approach of the subject. Excuse me. Now here there's a photo which I think is taken with a mobile phone because of the shape of the photo. And I like very much the idea of what I'm supposed to be looking at, but there's quite a few things that take my mind away from what I'm supposed to be looking at. I really like the idea of having all these beautiful glasses reflected, giving a very good texture, a lot of reflections in reflections, etc. But when you look at the edges, you can see that there was actually a frame of the cupboard where they're in, which is rounded on the edges. And my question is, why did you leave just a part of it in and not all of it in as a frame in a frame? or leave it all out so it wouldn't guide our eyes out of the picture instead of into the picture. I do like the fact that you have these deformed reflection of the lampshades in the background. And I really don't mind that you can actually see where the photographer was, because the overall image is in the same color palette, nice browns, and the highlights very white. I think it's interesting, but I think you could have done a few choices that made the photo stronger. I think if it would have been frame in frame, it would have been stronger.
Yeah.
This one is one that puzzles me a little bit, because a photo is actually the result of a whole bunch of choices you make, and in the hope that the people who look at your photo follow your choices without thinking about them. And of course, when you do a critique, you focus on the choices and why were they made. So I can relate to the fact that you try to eliminate all horizontals and verticals in this one, and that you cropped off certain parts like the plate in the background, a little bit of a beam in the foreground. But still, I'm not sure about the composition. I think the light on the subject is really interesting. It's an interesting subject in itself because of the marble grapes, the dried calabash, which has lovely texture, and the light falls on it. You have a shadow of something in the background falling over it. But still, I think there's too much going on in this photo to draw your eyes to the actual center. But I do like the idea that you've tried to eliminate horizontals and verticals. But I think with tilting your camera a bit, you could have tried different angles to see if you could have made it more expressive, I think. And now here we see actually the same subject, but from a completely different angle. And I think that this is also a photo that you could find in a magazine or a folder of a hotel or anything, because there's a lot here in this. For starters, here on this screen, it's rather small, but you have the beautiful orchids that are partly in the window frame and partly against the dark background. So that's a very interesting element. You also avoid, again, the verticals and the horizontal lines. Once again, I think that at the bottom, you have things that don't add to the actual composition. I'm going to try if I can, yes. So if you would do something a little bit like this, or maybe go a little bit more to the left or right, you could eliminate the things that don't add to the photo and still have the atmosphere that you were looking for. One thing that does disturb me, and I'm sorry to say that because I usually don't bother about these things, but there's an electric wire here, and there's of course the electric cord of the lampshade that do distract me a little bit, which I think is, well, you can clone these things out to make it more striking, I think. And now here we have the similar atmosphere and a very interesting composition in itself. But once again, I'm a little bit bothered that the corner of the window is just out of the photo. If it would have been cropped tighter, somewhere where you don't bother that it's not there, or leave it in, then it wouldn't take your eye away from it. And when you look for a little bit longer at the photograph, you also notice that there's a reflection here of the chairs outside on the patio. And for me, everything else in the photograph suggests older things, antique things, a certain nostalgia, and the chairs look slightly too new to me. But that's, you know, very personal. Okay. But I think the light here in the photo is very nice because you get a little bit of mist of light across the jar. And I think if you would have tried to bring out the jar more, you would have had probably too much digital noise in the photo. So I think you made it's the right choice here to leave it a little bit obscured in the midst of the reflective light. And those were Pedro's photos. So a very interesting take from Pedro. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
And here we have a very lovely photo of, well, you can see it. It's an old bottle with grime on it in a sort of alcove or something, with a beautiful, really muted color palette with greens, browns, everything in it. And I'm going to use this photo to say a little something about, because we hear a lot in the critiques, it's a pretty photo, it's not such a pretty photo. And we have to consider that we do have a natural instinctive sense of beauty, of aesthetics, but we cannot always rely on or relate to that because everything we see is immediately connected to our conditioning. Because in real life, if we would have a bottle with grime on it, we would say, oh, it's ugly, I'm not going to touch it. If this would be in our living room, we would have a fit because the wall is breaking down. There's dirt on the bottle, but because of the composition and the fact that it's a photograph, the grime, the way the light falls on the grime, or if it would be mold or anything, it does appeal to our sense of aesthetics, of beauty. So as photographers, we need to be aware that we can capture beauty in things that are considered not beautiful. If we see a photograph of a spider made by Emilio, we will all be in awe of saying, what a beautiful spider. If the spider walks on our bedsheet when we just wake up, totally different story. And I think this photograph really captures the idea of you can make a photo of something that's not considered pretty in a way that we all can really appreciate the beauty of it. Because it is literally photography, writing with light. This is really what this photo does. Interesting shape in the shadow, beautiful light, everything, good composition on thirds if you wish, very good. Now this one is entirely different and still exactly the same because it's painting with light. When I saw the image on my computer in the folder, so it's very small there, I thought it was an eyelid and a nose and a cheek. I'm not sure if it is that, because here we can just appreciate the beautiful texture, the colors in the texture, browns, blues, blacks, whites, a little bit of a hint of something going on in the background, and quite a bold composition. So I really like that. I appreciate that. And yes, it still is a still life, a detail, but an interesting photo in itself. And now this is the kind of photo that we are all, I think, tempted to make when we walk around. This really is a still life, ready-made to make a photograph of. And I'm quite sure that this photographer tried different angles and stooping down, standing up. And you can feel that, for me, the composition works because there's a sense of geometric composition in there, whilst there is actually no geometry there because it's really busy with all the white wiring. But because it's limited down to three colors, white, the red of the round shape, and the turquoise in the thicker wires, it's an interesting composition. it's interesting to look at. The light is very good here. Nothing blurred out, nothing too dark. Interesting, nice photo. And then here we have again, I would say the still life, but the nature still life as we can find it. Here on the screen, it's almost not visible, but it's actually snow and an autumn leaf in the snow. So there's a little bit of detail in the snow, making it very interesting. And we have all the detail in the leaf, all the lifelines and the little spots on there. So technically a very good photo. And a very minimalist photo. For my taste, and this is very personal, I would have tilted the camera a little bit so that there would be a little bit more of a diagonal in it to make it slightly more dynamic, but that's a personal choice. This is a much more I don't know what the right word is, a very soft composition. And those were Trevor's photos. Thank you, Trevor. Very interesting. Now we're going to a completely different way of approaching the subject as it comes to mood and atmosphere. I immediately was reminded of certain paintings by Picasso, because Picasso did a lot of fishbone things with with a lot of ideas behind that. So I really like the idea of trying to make a photo and a composition of a subject that you wouldn't think of immediately, a fishbone. You would think that certainly in food photography, the fish would be more interesting than the bone. But here you have a composition of a very textured background with a lot going on, a glass of beer, the empty plate, and the two fish bones, a fork. Once again, no horizontals, no verticals. But I think that once again here on this side, the plate is not completely in the photo. And it makes me wonder, if you would have tilted the camera a little more, you could have had the plate in, or you could have had slightly more of the plate out, something like this almost, where it would become more of an abstract composition that you can still recognize. A very good choice of the very...
Frank, sorry to interrupt you. We're still getting a lot of noise from both Pedro and Richard interrupting you on the Zoom. Could Richard and Pedro, please, could you mute your microphone so we can hear Frank?
I hope we won't have... I can hear a little bit of feedback here, but I can't see, because it's not my computer, who's muted and not. But so if it would continue...
Richard, both Richard Bird and Pedro are still unmuted. It's theirs that keep coming up as...
Could Richard and Pedro, could you please mute your microphones? Okay, so I think that this is a very personal choice to also leave in the background behind the table. I find it interesting, but I'm quite sure that a lot of people would have preferred that if the photographer would have gone higher up, use the table as a background, and have the play of the circles, the top of the glass, the bottom of the glass, and the plate and the shadow of the glass as a composition of circles and ovals against the texture of the table. Now, this is a traditional still life, very tightly cropped, and a traditional subject, Spanish subject, Spanish cheese the sausages, the knife, and the water jug or the wine jug. Now, personally, for this type of composition, I expect a photograph that's really, really sharp, where you can really see the difference in texture between all the materials used in the photograph, especially if you do it in black and white, because then you take away the color information. So it's all about the texture. And for me personally, I think this photograph is not sharp enough, and it doesn't have enough texture in the cheese and the other elements. So as an idea, very good, but I would have loved to seen it much sharper. And here, you could say that the same applies here. You really need a very sharp photograph, even though I can understand that you're trying to border on abstract here, because the texture and the color in the aubergines, as a play with the plastic in the background, is just a study of black and white and textures, quite busy but quite interesting. But once again, I'm not sure if maybe if you see if you would, I can't of course do a cropping here, but you can make a real abstract, interesting photo out of here, but then it's no longer a still life. So for me, this one borders too much between still life and abstract. It's like the choice hasn't been made up, but still there's a lot of interesting elements in this photo, I think. And now this one is, I find this an intriguing photo because it keeps my mind switching between abstract and what am I seeing. I am seeing a swordfish in a restaurant or somewhere, because there's a bottle of wine, there's taps on, and there's a room with lights. And my guess is that the photographer tried to once again go between abstract and figurative, where you can recognize something. But somewhere, I think we're seeing way too much middle tone grays and strange lines that keep your mind switching between, am I supposed to look at something I recognize, or am I supposed to appreciate a play of grays and whites? Because it's too busy as a composition, I think, to go the second way. So I think if you would do something like this with it, it already becomes more of abstract, of a play of darks, whites, and shadows. So for me, it's a good photo to but make it an interesting image, I would say. And those were Angel's photos. Thank you, Angel. Now here I chose to put these photos after those of Angel's, because there's obviously quite a similarity, and I forgot to say a thing or two maybe in Angel's photos. But this photo really gives me the opportunity to talk about this, because I think this is a very good composition, very simple monochrome. There is things going on in the background. You have a texture, but it's much softer than the actual subject. And the photographer dared to enhance the contrast so that the actual shadow and the actual object merge together, because the black in the fruit flower thing goes over in the shadow, making the shadow actually very prominent. But it's a very interesting shape. It's very well put in the square composition. And you have the stem and a few leaves that are slightly out of focus, which is very good here because it emphasizes the sharpness of the actual subject. So this is a very, very good photograph to my taste. And as I said in the beginning, all you have to do is take an object, put it on your coffee table, and make a photo of it. So this is a very interesting choice. Just a banana peel. And as in the very first photograph of Harry, you have a gradient here going from black to white diagonally in the background. But because here, the contrast with the actual subject, which is the yellow of the banana peel and the beige of the inside, is much stronger than the black and white from the background, it does work here. And you get an interesting angle of the peel. The only thing, if I want to be really, really nitpicking, or I don't know what's the word in English, is that there are a few white spots in the black that you can clone out easily without losing the beautiful texture of the background. I think this is an interesting, very straightforward take on the challenge. And the same actually goes here. There's, for me, a good balance between background and foreground, because you can see here that, okay, okay. There's a little bit of light coming through the white part of the feather, giving a little bit of white in the shadow. There's so much going on in the shadow that it's really, really interesting. Unfortunately, and I know this because I've tried to do similar things, I think the feather itself could have been sharper and would have made an excellent, superb photograph. Because it's not razor sharp, it's just 95% of what it could have been. But it's, once again, the composition is so simple. Diagonal composition. You got more going on below the diagonal because of the interesting shadow. There's beautiful colors, even though it's a near black and white feather. Very interesting, very good. Now, this is one of my favorites of the challenge, because everything I've said, the photos before, goes here, only in black and white. A very good choice of background because there's texture in it. And the dried out leaf has so much going on in it. Very interesting, very nice, high contrast, very good. At home, actually, I've rotated the photograph 4 times. It works in every angle. It's quite interesting. Really, really good photo. And those were Alfred Taylor's photos. Thank you, Alfred. I think this was a really, really good, well, set is not the right word, but 4 very good photos. Okay. Inanimate object, yes. Well, traditionally, unless we go back to the paintings of the 17th, 18th century, we don't usually see dead animals or dead animal parts, but it does happen. So this, for me, this is a fun photo. Unfortunately, for me, the white container in which the pig's head lies doesn't do anything for the photo. So, but I think it's a funny take on the subject. Maybe a little bit confrontational. But yeah, yeah, well, I think yeah, there's some comments here in the audience. I think if you wanted it to be confrontational, I would have tried to get rid of the container and try to get the expression on the face more aggressive or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. With an apple, it might have been funnier. I think it's a good idea, but it's not there yet. You could have done more with this. And now here we have a very good abstract composition, a very interesting light and shade play game. Unfortunately for me, when you start really looking at the picture, because that's what I did, because I really, really like the curves, it's very interesting. Then your eyes start to see the details in the background. So you actually, after a while, see that there's an air conditioning unit in the back that, well, disturbs me a little bit. And the right-hand corner below, yeah, it's a shame because I think the crop of this photo is what we've been hearing the past few months. Try to crop really tight. I think this one really hits the spot because it's super tight at the bottom, but you leave a little bit space on the top, and so you can see the wiring of where it's hanging, making it interesting. So I think if you would take a lot of time, because I've tried it quickly and it didn't work, to get rid of the air conditioning and the little corner in the bottom, this would be a very, very interesting photograph. And here we have a food photograph image, and food, well, this type of food photography is, according to Google, a sub division of still life. And I think that it's an interesting composition because you got actually a simple circular composition with a center, and because quite obviously all the oysters have different shapes and things going on, there's a lot there, but it still remains very harmonic. However, I think, oh, no, unfortunately, I tried to, no, this one isn't good. I thought that people might think it's better in black and white, but it isn't. Unfortunately, I tried it with more background, so more white around it, and I think that worked slightly better. And now this one, I think, is one of my favorites of the challenge. Yes, it is a still life because there's a lot of inanimate objects working together. I have no idea what I'm looking at. It's some kind of a machine. But the great thing in this photograph is that you have the light falling on the machine, on the pipes, the tubes, keeping it in a very nice, interesting, soft color scheme with several textures, but there's nothing that really jumps out. The only thing that really jumps out for me is how beautiful the light falls on it all. So it's not a classical composition, but because of the colors, for me, it really, really, really works. I love it. And those were Juran's photographs. And that brings us in the middle of the photos that we have, I think. I don't know if it's too early for a break or... Okay, we are going to take a break now. I can't see the time, so let's say we take a 15-minute break and then be back. Okay. Half an hour break. We're going to have a half an hour break, everybody. I'm not going too fast. Very interesting. Very interesting.